The restaurant was one of those places designed to make you feel small, unless you were the one holding the bill. The air smelled of truffle oil, aged wine, and the kind of arrogance that only comes with a three-figure price tag per plate. Crystal glasses chimed like wind chimes in a storm, and the hum of forced laughter bounced off the gold leaf ceilings, creating an echo chamber of pretension. Jessica sat at the head of the table, her posture perfect, her champagne flute never empty, her stories never ending. She was in her element, center stage, bathed in the adoration of her friends, who were less like individuals and more like reflections in a funhouse mirror, distorted, hollow, and utterly dependent on her for their shape. I was halfway through a piece of fish so delicate it practically dissolved like a bad decision on the tongue. It tasted like nothing, but the price tag could have paid a month's rent for the apartment I'd grown up in. The kind of place where the waitstaff moved like ghosts, anticipating every need before it was spoken, and the sommelier treated the wine list like a sacred text. Jessica's voice cut through the clatter of silverware, sharp as the steak knife I'd been absent-mindedly twirling between my fingers. "You know," she said, her tone dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from never having been told no, "my loyalty has a price tag." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "And he couldn't afford it even if he tried." Her friends erupted, high, brittle laughter, the kind that shatters like glass when you least expect it. One of them, a woman named Claire, whose entire personality seemed to revolve around Jessica's approval, clutched her chest as if Jessica had just delivered the punchline of the century. "Oh my God, Jess, you're evil," Claire wheezed, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin that probably cost more than my first laptop. I didn't react. Not a flinch, not a clenched jaw, not even a flicker of annoyance in my eyes. That's what she wanted. A scene, a fight, proof that she could still rattle me. But I'd spent years writing code, debugging systems, and learning that the most devastating errors are the ones no one sees coming, the kind that lurk in the background, silent and patient, until the entire system collapses under its own weight. Jessica's eyes locked onto mine, her smirk deepening as she waited for the explosion. She wanted me to snap, to throw my napkin down and storm out, to give her friends something to gossip about over their next overpriced brunch. She wanted drama, chaos, proof that she still had power over me. But I'd long since learned that the best way to win a game is to refuse to play. I set down my fork, picked up my wine glass, raised it toward her just slightly, as if toasting her cleverness. "Cheers," my silence said. "Enjoy the show." For the first time that evening, her smirk faltered. It was subtle, a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the facade, but I saw it. The script she'd written in her head didn't have this line. She'd expected rage, or hurt, or at the very least, a defensive stammer. What she got was a calm, measured smile, the kind you give to a child who's just told a joke they don't quite understand. "Mark's so quiet tonight," she said, her voice laced with false sweetness as she turned to her friends. "I think I've finally rendered him speechless." Another round of laughter. I took a sip of my wine, letting the rich, oaky notes wash over my tongue. It was a good vintage. Expensive, the kind of wine that's meant to impress, to signal status. I wondered, not for the first time, if Jessica even knew the difference between a $20 bottle and a $200 one, or if she just ordered the most expensive thing on the list because she could. "I think you broke him." Another friend, Lena maybe, or was it Lauren, chimed in, her voice nasally and grating. She reached across the table to pat my hand, her fingers cold and clammy. Poor thing. I didn't pull away. I just looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. The carefully contoured face, the highlights that cost more than my weekly grocery bill, the designer dress that she'd probably only wear once before moving on to the next trend. She was a walking, talking mood board, a collection of expensive parts assembled to create the illusion of a person, and for a year I'd let myself believe that the illusion was real. Or maybe, I said, my voice low and even, I just don't have anything to say. The table fell silent. Not the awkward silence that comes from an uncomfortable joke, but the kind of silence that follows a power outage, sudden, disorienting, and heavy with the weight of what comes next. Jessica's eyes narrowed, her lips parting slightly as she searched for a comeback. But for once, she had nothing. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of clinking glasses and forced smiles. I tasted nothing, heard only the white noise of my own thoughts. A system with a critical flaw. That's what we were. A relationship built on uneven foundations, where I'd convinced myself that love was enough to bridge the gap between what I was willing to give and what she was willing to take. I thought back to the early days, when Jessica's ambition had seemed charming, her confidence intoxicating, the way she'd laugh at my jokes, the way she'd lean into me when we walked down the street, as if I were the only thing keeping her upright. I'd ignored the red flags, the way she'd casually mention the things her exes had bought her, the way her eyes would light up not when I talked about my work, but when I talked about my profits. I'd told myself that it didn't matter, that people change, that love conquers all, but love doesn't conquer greed, and people only change when they want to. Jessica's voice pulled me back to the present. Mark, darling, are you even listening? I blinked, refocusing on her. She was holding up her phone, showing off a pair of earrings to her friends. Aren't these gorgeous? They're limited edition. I was thinking of getting them for our trip to Monaco next month. Monaco, of course, because a weekend in the Hamptons wasn't enough anymore, because nothing ever was. Sounds expensive, I said, my tone neutral. She waved a hand dismissively. Oh, they're an investment. Besides, you always say I deserve the best. I did say that, didn't I? Back when I thought the best meant happiness, not a price tag. The bill arrived, tucked into a sleek black folder like a secret. $1,247, $50. For a meal I barely tasted, in a restaurant I'd never visit again, with people I didn't like. I handed over my card without a word, watching as the waiter disappeared to process the payment. Jessica's hand found my thigh under the table, her nails digging in just enough to be uncomfortable. You're too quiet, she murmured, her voice dripping with false concern. What's wrong? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her clearly. Not the woman I'd fallen for, but the one she'd become, a black hole of want, consuming everything in her path and still hungry for more. Nothing. I lied, my voice smooth as silk. Everything's exactly as it should be. The car ride home was a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. Jessica buzzed with the afterglow of attention and champagne, her voice a relentless stream of plans and dreams and things she needed to have. A new bag, a weekend in St. Bart's. A small loan to tide her over until her next big break as an influencer. I nodded along, my responses vague, my mind already 3 steps ahead. She didn't notice. She never did. When we pulled up to the condo I owned, the condo I paid for, the condo she treated like her personal kingdom, she leaned over to kiss my cheek. You're the best, she said, her breath hot and cloying against my skin. I don't know what I'd do without you. I smiled. You're about to find out. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. You're so silly. Come on, let's go to bed. I'll make it worth your while. I watched her saunter inside, her hips swaying with the confidence of a woman who's never been told she can't have what she wants. Then I turned and walked toward my home office, closing the door behind me with a quiet click. I didn't turn on the light. I just stood there in the dark, listening to the hum of the city outside, the distant wail of a siren, the muffled sound of Jessica's voice as she chattered away on the phone. My hands were steady as I pulled out my laptop, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across the room. I opened a new document, typed a single word at the top: eviction. Then I started to plan.